Hello, my name's Alana Bettenbow and today I'm going to be reading my children's picture book Brother Butterfly, which is illustrated by Philippa Bernard. Caterpillars, Percy and Charlie, were brothers and the best of friends. Wherever one crawled, the other crawled too. Although Percy was the oldest, they were identical in size. The only way to tell them apart was a little birthmark near Charlie's left eye. The brothers each had 16 wriggly legs attached to bright green hairy bodies. They lived a simple but happy life in a magnificent oak tree in the park. Every inch of the enormous tree was home to a woodland creature or insect, a habitat hotel with a different species on each floor. Percy and Charlie lived on the third highest branch. The ladybirds, who lived on the next branch up, were fantastic foragers. Using berries to disguise themselves as ladybirds, the brothers would sometimes sneak up to steal a tasty treat or two. One day, Percy and Charlie noticed a circle of worried-looking caterpillars at the end of their branch. As they crept closer, they realised the large round caterpillar in the middle of the huddle was their cousin Rupert, and he was 3 times his normal size. Rupert was surrounded by food, his cheeks were rounded but pale, and he looked afraid. "I'm a mess," mumbled Rupert through a mouthful of berries. "I can't sleep and I can't stop eating. What's happening to me?" One of the other caterpillars whispered, "It could be the change. I heard my uncle talking about it once, but before I could ask him any more about it, he vanished." Charlie was terrified and clung to his brother. While they tossed and turned that night beneath a blanket of stars, Rupert disappeared, leaving nothing but apple pips. "Perhaps he's gone on holiday," suggested Percy the next morning, feeling hopeful. He didn't want his little brother to worry. Charlie was not convinced. His nervous tummy fluttered. More and more caterpillars vanished over the next few nights. Their bustling oak tree was soon home to just 6 caterpillars. Charlie's tummy churned even worse than ever. "I'm scared," whimpered Charlie, cuddling against Percy's side. "I don't want to change like the others." "It's just a story, Charlie. It's nothing to worry about. We'll be fine," Percy reassured him. He tried to sound convincing, but he was also starting to feel strange. It wasn't long before the overwhelming urge took over. Just like Rupert, Percy began to shovel scoops of food into his cheeks. Before he'd finished breakfast, he was moving on to lunch, his tummy growing rounder by the minute. "Please stop, Percy," Charlie begged. A week later, only Percy, Charlie and one other caterpillar remained. Their branch was eerily quiet. Charlie asked some of the nocturnal creatures if they'd seen anything suspicious at night, but not even the owls with their wide glowing eyes could help him. Charlie decided to keep watch that evening. He placed an acorn cup on his head as a helmet and guarded his brother. "I won't let you disappear," he said. "I won't let it get you. I'm going to stay awake all night." Charlie marched up and down with his eyes fixed on Percy, whose cheeks were as white as May blossom. But before long his feet ached, his eyes felt heavy, and he fell fast asleep. When sunlight burst through the gaps in the leaves, Charlie nervously opened his eyes. There was no sign of the other caterpillar or Percy. Charlie was completely alone. Charlie scoured the branches, sobbing and calling out Percy's name. An army of ants heard Charlie shout and kindly agreed to help him. They could crawl much faster than Charlie and scurried all over the tree. The search party reported back with news. They'd found a mound of half-eaten blackberries at the base of the tree. The ants clung to each other to form a caterpillar raft and carried Charlie all the way down. Blobs of blackberry juice decorated the grass and glistened in the sun. Grateful, Charlie thanked the ants and set off on his quest to find his missing brother. He walked for hours, following the trail of berries, footprints and apple chunks, praying they would lead him to Percy. His poor little feet throbbed. Charlie tried to keep going, but it started to shower. Heavy drips washed away the clues and his chances of finding Percy. His tears pitter-pattered like the rain. Charlie curled up like a woodlouse, rested his back against a tree trunk and tightly closed his eyes. Charlie wandered among fallen oak leaves for nearly 2 weeks, searching for Percy. At night, afraid to be alone in the dark, he perched on the closest branch to a nearby street lamp. Charlie was starting to lose all hope when he spotted a silky shape hanging above. "Hello?" Charlie called out. The silky shape shivered and swayed. Charlie guessed that whatever or whoever was inside must be trapped. "I'll get help." When Charlie returned with a friendly ladybird in tow, the silky shape was shaking even harder than before. Charlie and the ladybird watched in amazement as a beautiful creature emerged from within and unfolded its colourful wings. "Hello, Charlie," said the creature, fluttering its wings and smiling. It sounded just like Rupert. "Rupert, is that you?" gasped Charlie, looking confused. "Do you still not know?" Rupert asked. It started to rain. Rupert sheltered his cousin and explained all about the changes he'd experienced. "Did the change hurt?" Charlie asked, admiring Rupert's beautiful colours. "I didn't feel a thing." Charlie asked question after question, his eyes wide with wonder. He was no longer scared and wanted to know all about the change. Suddenly they were interrupted by a second butterfly with the brightest colours and the most magnificent patterns. "Percy!" cried Charlie, waving his little legs. "You're a butterfly too!" "I'm sorry I left you," whispered Percy, kissing his brother on the head. "It turns out I was ready to change." "When will I be ready?" asked Charlie, eager to join them now he knew what was going to happen. "Any day now, Charlie," said Percy, "and I'll be here beside you when you do." Percy was right. Charlie ate and ate until he instinctively built a silky cocoon around his body. When he emerged 12 days later, the brothers were almost identical again in striking red and blue. "There was nothing to be scared of after all," cried Charlie. I really hope you enjoyed listening to my story, which is a caterpillar's point of view of the amazing change that they go through to become butterflies.